Hey guys, I'm Evan Thorpe. This is Michelle Martinelli, and this is For the Wins College Football Breakdowns. And normally we talk about upsets and big games, but everybody took care of business this week. We had Clemson beating Boston College, Notre Dame beating Florida State University, Michigan beating Rutgers, and Alabama continuing to dominate the college football just in general, beating Mississippi State 24-0. And for Alabama, you gotta feel like this is a great time for you. You are basically waiting to play the SEC championship game. You have two teams that likely won't upset you, but you never know with college football. And you get a chance to rest some guys. They have some injuries, especially with their quarterbacks. Is this a good time for Alabama to kind of like pump the brakes on their season?
So normally you would say no, right? You want to be challenged as you go into the SEC championship game, which will likely be their most difficult game to date so far this season. But Alabama's a little banged up. Backup quarterback Jalen Hurts is still working his way back from a minor procedure on his sprained ankle. Against Mississippi State, Heisman Trophy candidate Tua Tagovailoa was really banged up. And so it might be a good thing to give them a little bit of a physical break. Not to say that they can overlook Citadel or Auburn next weekend, but this might, the Citadel's probably not going to sack Tua 4 times, right? It might, if he plays, it might give him a chance to, take it easy a little bit and give everybody, the other banged up players that we're not so focused on, it's deep into the football season. You have minor injuries. This might give you a chance to be at your best when you take on Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Speaking of Georgia, we know that they're on the outside looking in, but them along with Oklahoma, Ohio State, West Virginia, they still have a chance to get into the college football playoffs. What do these teams need to happen for them in order to get in?
So, one of the biggest things is you got to hope someone in the top 4, Clemson, Alabama, Notre Dame, or Michigan, lose. I still think that if Alabama is a one-loss team, it's getting in the playoff regardless.
Just like last year.
Right. And it seems like really most likely if they are going to have a loss this season, it's going to come to Georgia in that championship game. And that is Georgia's only path to the playoff. They have to upset Alabama in the SEC championship game. Or they'll have 2 losses, and even if it's a close game, even if it's a good game against Alabama, a 2-loss team has never made the playoff, and Georgia, as a not SEC champion, is not going to cut it. However, if they upset Nick Saban and his team in the championship game, a 1-loss SEC championship Georgia team probably ensures that there's 2 SEC teams in the 14 playoff.
All right, so what about the Big Ten? We know that Michigan is sitting comfortably in the driving seat, but what can Ohio State do to get in?
So for all these teams, the scenario is you have to win out. That's the bare minimum, right? And so Ohio State winning out includes beating Michigan at home in 2 weeks. They play Maryland this weekend, and that shouldn't be too much of an issue for them. But this Michigan team is looking great, one of the strongest teams in the country right now. But they haven't won in Columbus since 2000. That's a rowdy and wild environment. But if Ohio State can win out, go to the Big Ten championship game against Northwestern and beat Northwestern, I think it'll be really hard to deny a 1-loss Big Ten champion a spot in the playoff, assuming that Georgia doesn't upset Alabama.
All right, so if you have the Big Ten champion with 1 loss against an unranked team, can a Big 12 team with 1 loss get in?
So the Big 12 is tricky at this point. Oklahoma and West Virginia are at the top of the standings right now, and they are on a path to play each other in back-to-back weekends. They're already on each other's schedules for the regular season finale, but it looks like they're going to end up playing each other again the following week in the Big 12 championship game. And basically it's pretty simple for what the Big 12 needs to do to try and get into one of those playoff spots. The same team has to win both of those games if we're looking at West Virginia and Oklahoma. If they split those games, the Big 12, they will essentially knock the Big 12 out of playoff contention at all. Let's, for the sake of argument, say it's Oklahoma. Say Oklahoma beats West Virginia back-to-back weekends. They're a 1-loss Big 12 champion. That's not going to be enough to get in the playoff. They need some type of madness to happen in the Big Ten. Like say Michigan loses this weekend to Indiana, but then beats Ohio State and goes on to win the Big Ten championship game. They're still a 2-loss team, and that's where a 1-loss Big 12 champion might get that edge. But again, they're still hoping that Georgia doesn't upset Alabama because that's going to ruin all those chances.
All right, so basically all these teams are looking for Georgia to lose to Alabama in the SEC championship, and then hopefully they could just win out.
Right. The only one actually rooting for Georgia is Georgia at this point.
Yeah.
Two SEC teams ruins everybody's plans.
And going back to the Big 12, you have a big matchup this weekend with West Virginia going to Oklahoma State. And there's one thing about these Cowboys, they can play a close game. We saw them barely lose to Oklahoma. And can they upset West Virginia?
So I think West Virginia would be foolish to overlook this Cowboys team, even though they're in the bottom half of the Big 12. They only lost to Oklahoma on Saturday by 1 point, and that was arguably because of a coaching decision rather than an execution problem. And so West Virginia, obviously, like all of these teams, has to keep winning to stay in contention. If West Virginia loses on the road to Oklahoma State, essentially they put Oklahoma in the driver's seat for any type of outside playoff chance. But I just don't see it. I just don't know that Oklahoma State is going to be able to take on two quarterbacks like that in back-to-back weeks and do it successfully. I see West Virginia coming out on top in this one.
All right, last up, a team that's, like we said, are in right now, Notre Dame. They face Syracuse, and Syracuse has been a tough matchup for teams this season. We saw them play Clemson tough. Do you think they can get a good game out of Notre Dame?
I imagine that Syracuse might be able to, like, this is a relatively good Syracuse team this year. The problem is the ACC is not that strong. And so I imagine that Syracuse could probably hang in there for a little bit, but I imagine the Fighting Irish are probably winning by 2-3 touchdowns on this one at the end.
So Notre Dame is going to remain undefeated along with UCF. We didn't talk about them, but they're still in the chase for their own national championship. So look out for that.
Hey, they're on a 22-game win streak.
Yeah, I mean, not many teams can really say that unless you're Alabama.
No one can say that. No one else is on a 22-game win streak, but you still don't have what it takes at this current moment to be a serious playoff contender.
Well, I'm Evan Thorpe. This is Michelle Martinelli. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more.